Hello, welcome to Mindfulness and Classroom Community. We're calling this presentation Three Breaths Together. And we'll be talking a lot about mindfulness, building community, and reducing stress both in ourselves and in our students, and how that helps everyone. I'm Michelle Brenner. I'm from the North Carolina School of Science and Math, where I teach our digital humanities course as well as a course called American Studies. I've been teaching for about 20 years and in all different types of formats. So I've, of course, taught face to face, but I'm also pretty comfortable in the online format as well. Now, if you've been in teaching long enough, you know that every so often something comes along that is the next big thing to fix all the other things. When I first started teaching, it was writing across the curriculum. And I feel like every so often we get these things. And if you look around the interwebs, you will see all of these different articles about mindfulness and how it's going to fix everything that is wrong with our schools. I don't believe that. I don't think anybody should believe that. But I do think it is a small piece of the puzzle, both in teacher retention and in students' health and well-being. Because I don't know about you guys, but we have really noticed in our school a rise in depression, anxiety, behavior disorders. And this data is not from our school, but from nationwide surveys. We also know that depression disproportionately affects our young female students. And at NCSSM, in our survey results, 69% of our students labeled depression and mental health as a severe problem on campus. And their most prominent strategies for coping were self-distraction, which I assume is things like Instagram, TikTok, etc., and self-blame, which just made me so sad when I read it. I will also say that there's a very good reason that I feel that I need more mindfulness in my life. I am a mother of three. I have twin 4-year-olds and an 8-year-old who is doing third grade through the interwebs right now. And it requires a lot of patience and presence in order to do well, which I do not do all the time. But mindfulness does help me do it a little bit better. So I think it's important to talk about what mindfulness is and what mindfulness is not, because there's a lot of sort of ideas out in the world about well, mostly I picture like a yogi on a rock with the sun setting behind him, and this kind of idea of mindfulness. But that's not necessarily, I mean, it can be, but that's not the only thing that mindfulness is. So I think it's important to talk about the fact that mindfulness is not religious. While, oh, I didn't know I could do that. While mindfulness can be seen as part of transcendental meditation, and in the Buddhist tradition, it is not in and of itself a religious practice, nor does it need to be. It is not zoning out or thinking about nothing. In fact, that's not what brains do or how they work. So zoning out, if that's your goal, is futile. It's not being happy all the time. Again, futile. Living only in the present and not thinking about goals or the future at all. It's also not completely just relaxation. And one thing that I have learned the more I study and practice mindfulness is that it's not easy. It's simple, but it is so, so hard in our distracted, multitasking world to focus and be mindful and present in each moment. So John Kabat-Zinn, he defines mindfulness as paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. And I've highlighted those three parts because I think each one of them deserves a bit. So, paying attention on purpose. So, what that means is that when we are being mindful, we are paying attention to the fact that we are being mindful. Um, we are in the present moment. So, we are not thinking about the future. We are not back in the past. And the one that I find the most difficult, non judgmentally. So, as we are focusing on our present moment and taking the time out of our day to focus on that present moment, that we are welcoming and accepting of everything we find there, which is so, so hard. Viktor Frankl says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And for me, this is one of the biggest benefits of mindfulness. And the way I think of it is it kind of looks something like this, right? Without mindfulness, we become less aware of the fact that our brains are reacting to stimuli all the time, right? So with each stimulus, we have a reaction. Somebody slams on their brakes in front of us, and we react with very polite hand gestures or equally polite expressions. But with mindfulness, we can kind of insert that awareness and acceptance in between the stimulus and our response in order to make better choices. I like to tell the story about when I was pregnant with my twins and I was walking around the school. Our campus takes up a city block, and I like to walk around the school when I get stuck on my work. So one day I was walking around the school, and I was on my phone, of course, because I wasn't even being mindful in that walk. And a car pulled up next to me. The gentleman inside asked to borrow my phone, and very quickly drove off with it. I yelled and I screamed, and I probably even shook my fist in the air after him. I got really upset. I went to the community resource officers, I talked to them, and then I went and sat in my office, and I'm like so mad and angry. I had gone straight from stimulus, somebody stealing my phone, to my reaction of anger, frustration, shame. I mean, somewhat ashamed of being so naive and so easily taken advantage of, right? But as I sat in my office, one of the things I did is I just kept stewing on the question, like, what kind of person does that? Right. And at first, when I asked that question, I kept saying it in exactly the voice I just did. And then I asked it again, and what kind of person does that? And eventually I came to the fact that the kind of person who thinks that their best option is to take advantage of other people and other people's kindness probably doesn't have much going on in their life, doesn't believe that they are worth much more than that. And in that moment, I made a choice to forgive the gentleman who drove off with my phone. And I didn't feel naive, and I didn't feel ashamed, and I didn't feel taken advantage of anymore. I felt kind of like a badass. I was like, I can let go of all of that anger and frustration and shame. I mean, I was shaking. I was so upset. But in making that choice, I mean, I'm not sure that I accepted the fact that he stole my phone. I mean, those things are expensive, man. But I did make the choice that I wasn't going to let it make me a different person, and I wasn't going to let it make me angry. And the control that that provides was sort of addictive. And it is what led me on my path to learn more about mindfulness. So, mindfulness is not just meditation. Mindfulness can be done pretty much anywhere and during anything. Mindful breathing is one way that we practice in my classes and that I practice in my own life. Mindful movement. I am a big yoga nerd and I love yoga, but it is not the only mindfulness practice. Mindful running, mindful walking, mindful eating. We can also be mindful when we are listening. I think a lot of times our brains are connecting and reflecting and doing all sorts of other things that when we think we're listening, that are not actually listening. Body scan practices find very effective, and mindful moments during the day, which is actually one of the most powerful things in my own life. Where I stop for a second and recognize where my attention is and whether or not that attention being focused in that place is useful. Also, elementary school teachers, you might think about zones of regulation and the way that you talk about that as a mindful practice. So, how do we get started? I would say the easiest way to get started with mindfulness in your classroom is to practice yourself. It's also hard because it's another thing to do in your day, and I get that. The Calm app has the Daily Calm. It's a yearly subscription. They for a bit had educator discounts. I'm not sure if they still do, but I would say it's worth it. Headspace is another. I'm sure there's plenty more out there. But the Daily Calm is 10 minutes long. So if you can find 10 minutes where you can focus on one thing and not do anything else, I think you will find it worth it. Also, recommended readings. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics is one of my favorites. Hyperfocus is another one that's really good. There's also a Palouse Mindfulness self-paced online course, which has a lot of links to a lot of great resources and PDFs of those resources. Let's see. It's just palousemindfulness.com/mbsr/week1, and that will take you to the daily practices, supplemental readings, if you like videos as opposed to readings, et cetera, et cetera. And so the way that we've done this in my class most effectively is 3 breaths together. And we just start off every single day, face-to-face Zoom class, tutorial session, whatever, with community breathing, which sounds super weird and kind of new agey, and I get it. But reminding them that their mental health is important, reminding them that they can take a minute in which they do nothing other than breathe, has been really powerful for my students. And it really does only take a little over a minute. Sorry. So Ezra from my class last year said, I personally feel like the best thing I learned in American Studies was breathing. Taking 3 deep breaths has taken me a long way by helping me regain control and remain calm despite the various problems I faced. As I run, I constantly focus on taking in air through my nose and releasing it through my mouth, helping me relax my heart before pushing past my competition. However, it's helped me clear my thoughts and outside distractions in order to prepare myself for upcoming assignments, tests, and projects. Brooke told us that she feels that learning about meditation helped her grow a lot last year. She started to meditate every day and found that she was much more relaxed and rational about her problems. She said this was especially useful to help her speak up in class. She said she wanted to continue to improve this technique and to share her thoughts in a thoughtful and confident way. I'll get to concerns in a second. But first, what I would like to do is actually take 3 breaths with you. So this is how I lead a typical 3 breaths together session, I guess. That seems way too formal for what it actually is, but I start off by asking them to close their eyes or let their focus grow calm. During Zoom sessions, one thing I've found helpful is to actually ask them to take their hands off their keyboards, to ask them to focus on an image. I put, goofy calendar type images of, leaves floating in water, or I don't know, sunsets or whatever on the screen, to give them something if they choose not to close their eyes, because it can be a little bit creepy, I've found, to close your eyes. While being video recorded on Zoom. I don't know if the kids feel the same way about the video recording, but I do. Um, so I have found it useful to actually ask them to take their hands off their their keyboards, to focus on the image, and to focus on what we're doing, because it is important, and keeping their brains healthy is important. So I start off by asking them to close your eyes or let your focus grow calm. Start bringing your attention to your breath. On days that my thoughts are particularly noisy, I like to hold on to a word like in when I'm breathing in, and out when I'm breathing out. But as we start breathing, we're not so much focused on changing the breath or judging the breath, but just noticing it for what it is. Taking a minute to just breathe, putting down what came before this, setting aside what comes next. And when thoughts pop into your head like they do, because that's what brains do, not judging them, just noticing them. Maybe imagining a volume dial and turning down the volume of those thoughts, trusting that they'll be there when we're done, if they're necessary, or letting go of them if they're not. And the next time you exhale, exhale out all that old stale air. Soften your belly and breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Pause. And exhale. And breathe in. Pause. And let it go. One more long, slow breath in. Pause. Open your mouth and let it all go. Blink your eyes open, wiggle your fingers and toes. It's a lot harder like many things, it's a lot harder in our distance learning environments. In a classroom, it's a lot easier to feel when the fidgets stop, to hear when everyone's body actually quiets. Sometimes if they're particularly wound up, I'll have them do a little stretching or crossing the midline before we actually start our meditation so that they can feel their body going from movement into stillness. And hopefully that's sort of a model for their brains going from all of that movement and stimulus and reaction into stillness as well. Um, some concerns that your students or their parents might have about mindfulness. You definitely want to build trust first. In my classrooms, I never force them to participate. I do ask them to put away their phones or their computers because that can be just too enticing. So that even if they need that sort of space and mindfulness, they choose not to participate because a text from their friend is more pressing. Um, Also, I think it's important to address the religious concerns directly for those who feel that this mindfulness is a practice that interferes with their religious practices or their religious beliefs. Of course, optional participation. Some students, especially those who have experienced trauma, can find mindfulness and even deep breathing stressful and triggering. And so we have to be careful of that. If you are in a face to face environment, first of all, I'm super jealous of you right now, but also, I would make sure that you do not move around the room while students have their eyes closed and you're directing mindfulness. It can be triggering and frightening for students who have experienced trauma. Um, I will say that I started off this practice as a just, you know, extension of my own yoga practice, to be honest. That I knew that at the beginning of every class, I was thinking about what class I had been in before that and what I had to get accomplished during the class that I was participating in. And I knew that my mind was not benefiting from that sort of scattered attention. And I realized that my mature brain is also a lot better at it than their mature, immature, and growing brains. And so while I started this practice as something that was just to give it a go, I found it so beneficial and so helpful in my own classroom that I wanted to share. So I hope you appreciated and enjoyed this presentation. And if you have any questions, I can be reached at Brenner at ncssm.edu. That's BRENNER at ncssm.edu. And I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.